So, Paul, just to understand, do I need to use the microphone for the recording, or does this one work for that?
That everything's fine. And by the way, I'm gonna fight with my wife. I want to tell you that Ben Swann is a big hero of mine, and I just want to say that everything. And I'll kudos everything she said.
Thank you. Well, you guys are kind. I left the clicker down here. I apologize. I got to come back for it. There it is. Well, I appreciate you guys having me. This is actually my second time here. The first time I was here was back in 2013. It was the first time that I spoke at any crypto-related, at the time it wasn't even called crypto, it was called Bitcoin only, Bitcoin conference, and I spoke here in Texas, which is my home state, and came here and spoke and talked a little bit about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin specifically as a great form of capitalism, and why I believed at the time, still do by the way, that crypto is really the only actual capitalist movement, example, structure anywhere in the world today. You know, the word capitalism is so hated in our vernacular, and yet most people don't even know what it means. They have no actual understanding of anything that would be a legitimate capitalist system. And cryptocurrency is that for good reasons and for bad reasons. I'm not talking about that today, but we can do that in the Q&A if you like. Okay, we're going to go about 20 minutes here, talk to you about this idea of decentralizing the media. We'll go through a few things, and then I want to open it up to questions and have a conversation because I think there's a lot to talk about. So let's get started. So let me begin by just giving you this quote from Winston Churchill. Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up in a hurry and hurry off as if nothing ever happened. That is, I think, the core of where we are in our society today. We are not a truth-focused or a truth-interested society. We are an echo-interested society. We have people who have a worldview, a society that has worldviews, and then they look for echo chambers in which to be validated in those worldviews. You guys know that. I don't need to convince you of any of it. Regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, that's where people are. Unfortunately, as a media guy, what I find is that there are so many people who are not interested in any form of truth or information anymore. They're only interested in media as an echo chamber to hear what they already believe, to be validated in what they already believe. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. So I'm a 3-time Edward R. Murrow Award winner, Lone Star Emmy Award winner from living here in Texas and serving in broadcast journalism here in Texas. 20 years as a broadcast journalist. I've worked for Fox, NBC, CBS stations, most recently in Atlanta, which is where my family and I still are today. Also the creator of a segment called Reality Check with Ben Swann and something called the Truth in Media Project. We'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. But the point in me telling you this is that my story is essentially this. I was, for many years, on the political spectrum, I would say I was a neocon. I was a hardcore Kool-Aid drinking Republican. And, you know, one of those who had never heard of a war he did not like and was a reporter, but I wouldn't really call myself a journalist for a lot of years. I was really just a talking head. I would deliver news on TV. I kind of had a vision of my life becoming a host of some kind or working for Fox Network at some point. It was kind of my vision and view. And then in 2010, my family moved from Texas, El Paso specifically, where I grew up. My first place I was on air for 10 years there. I was a reporter, video journalist, we call them photographers, video journalist. I was a morning anchor and then a primetime anchor. Did all of that here in Texas, covered Mexico's drug war. And it was in 2010 when I really had a huge epiphany. My first epiphany about media, though, if I can share with that quickly, actually came to me in 2009 while working in El Paso, covering the drug war. I would drive over every single day from El Paso into Juarez, and we would cover what was happening with the drug war there. And every single day, we would see unspeakable violence, and we would see the results of what was happening when you have this collaborative, if you will, between the Mexican government and the military and drug cartels, right? And it created this insane situation there for the people who were living. And then the network started to come down, and NBC would come down and cover, and I was working for an NBC station at the time. Fox would come down, and everyone was trying to cover what was happening in Mexico. It was the deadliest city in the world, Juarez was at the time. It was a deadlier city than Baghdad. And there were more journalists being killed in Mexico than any other place in the world. It was a very violent place, but I would see these reporters who would come down from the networks and they would cover what was happening, and when I would watch them and watch their reports, I could see that the things they were talking about were not true. And most of what they would say, most of what they would report on was this idea that bad people, drug dealers, that's what they would refer to them as, drug dealers, even though there was very little dealing going on in Juarez, were killing other drug dealers. It was narco on narco crime. And so it didn't really matter. It wasn't affecting anyone else. And so there was a lot of misrepresentation. So as a reporter who thought he knew it all and certainly thought he knew a lot about it, because I did know a lot about it, I started emailing to the producers and the reporters who were coming down and saying, hey, listen, guys, I understand you're coming from Washington or New York, you're coming from the network, but you're misreporting what's happening here, because I'm covering it every single day. And I just want to share with you what we're seeing, what we're finding, the people we're talking to. And I share this information. And they were completely disinterested on every level with what we were talking about. It never made it into their reports. They wouldn't respond to it. A couple of times I would hear back from a producer, and they would say that information doesn't really interest us right now. And what I found was that there was a narrative, and that the media at that time, who were covering this story, had a narrative before they ever set foot on the ground of what they wanted the story to be. And that was what they were going to report. Moved to Ohio in 2000 and the end of 2010, beginning of 2011, and took a job as an anchor at Fox News there in Cincinnati, and was there for 5 years in Cincinnati. But for 3 of those years, I was working for the Fox station there. That's how some of you came to know me, because it was also during that time was the 2012 election, and a guy named Ron Paul who was running for president at that time. And I didn't know much about Ron Paul, was not a Ron Paul fan because I didn't know anything about him, even though he was also from Texas. Knew nothing about his story or his beliefs and what he actually believed in. The only thing I knew about him was whenever there were debates and lots of Republicans were on the stage, there was a crazy old man at the end of the stage that they kind of put down there, and he would yell out crazy things that didn't really make sense, and that I didn't know much about him. But as I was covering the election in Ohio, the battleground state of battleground states, every single candidate was coming through, and we were covering candidates. It's of great interest to people there. And so I decided to do a segment through my Reality Check series called, well, it wasn't called anything, it was looking at all the Republican candidates. And at the end of covering all of them, including Herman Cain, I remember questioning him on his 999 plan, and Jeb Bush, and questioning him on his foreign policy stance, and going through the whole gamut of them. At the very end of it, there was a segment we did called What's So Wrong with Ron Paul? And it was just a quick segment about that crazy old guy, but in fairness, equal time, got to mention it. And I remember specifically the fact that I had 999 Facebook fans because 2 nights before I had interviewed Herman Cain, and we laughed at the fact that his 999 plan reflected my Facebook fans. I went to bed. The next morning when I woke up after doing this piece on Ron Paul, I had 6,000 fans on Facebook. And they were like, who are these people? And why do I have so many fans on Facebook this morning? And they all had like weird black strips across their eyes. You guys remember this? And it was the black, they called it black this out, or the Ron Paul blackout. And they would cover their faces because they said there was a blackout in media of the things that he believed in, which I thought didn't make sense, couldn't possibly be true, but started to look at it and started to look at what he was about and what he stood for, and started to realize as people would tell me there was a blackout, that in fact there was a blackout, and that in fact when you would have polls that included the different candidates who were running, they would remove the name of the person who was polling second, or sometimes remove the name of the person polling first, if that name was Ron Paul. And so I began to learn more about him and learn more about what he stood for, and this is not a speech about why Ron Paul is great, but for me it was an awakening. It was an awakening to a whole bunch of things. And it was a shift in my mindset of how media refuses to allow information to come out that does not fit with what the establishment wants. So that was the beginning of my real process from 2012, well, 2011, November of 2011 until today. And along the way, I've gone independent as a journalist. I've gone back and worked for the CBS station in Atlanta, gone independent again. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of that. But before we do, I want to talk to you about crypto, because part of that journey included in 2013 learning about something called Bitcoin. And at the time, I didn't know much about it. I was introduced to it by Roger Ver. He explained to me a lot about what Bitcoin was, and I remember I had 3 or 4 Skype conversations with the guy because I could not wrap my brain around this concept of how this digital money was going to change the world. And as he would explain it and what it was exciting to me, not from a monetary standpoint, but from a freedom standpoint, from a breaking the system of monetary control. And so in 2013, I had my first Bitcoin and was able to collect the first part of that, started to pay for projects in Bitcoin. I wish I hadn't paid for anything in Bitcoin. I wish I had hung on to all those suckers, and I didn't. Unfortunately, I was funding what I was doing with it. But it was an incredible time for me in terms of understanding what this was about. What I've come to find is that crypto is freedom. Crypto, to me, represents certain things. It represents free markets. For now, free markets. And you know what? There's really amazing things that come with having actual free markets. Now, again, the reason I started out by saying that this idea of capitalism and free markets is so foreign to people, because when you say that we live today in a free market in the United States, you're just using words that don't actually have meaning behind them. Right? We do not have free markets in this country. People who believe that, and especially people who want to bash the idea of capitalism or free markets, and you're entitled to bash those ideas if you don't like them, but the people who want to bash those ideas do so with this concept in mind that free markets are bad and capitalism is about greediness and corruption, and that if we have controls, then that eliminates corruption. And of course, that's not true. We all know that's not true. But the problem is that when the people who are explaining this to you are trying to make their case, they cannot give you an actual example of a free market. Show me one. Show me one of these diabolical free markets, and they don't exist, except for, I would argue, right now in the crypto space, there are free markets. They do exist. And there are good players and there are bad players. There are crypto that are great and there are crypto that are not. There are ICOs that are doing amazing things that are going to absolutely transform industries, and there are ICOs that are nothing more than money laundering. Right? There's good and there's bad out there. When you talk about the bad, that doesn't mean everything's bad. When you talk about the good, it doesn't mean everything's good. Ignorant people make very wide assumptions about industries as if they're all good or they're all bad. But intelligent people can look at the industry and say, well, there's positives, there's good things that come out of this, and there's also negatives. Those two things can coexist simultaneously, despite what the media will tell you. Freedom to participate, that's another thing that crypto represents. Very few places in our society today do you have the freedom to participate. So when you have a free market, but that free market is not forced upon anyone, it becomes much more free, does it not? To me, crypto is a great example of that, because no one's forcing anyone to be a part of anything. You can participate. You don't have to. There's competition among crypto. There's competition among cryptocurrencies, among ICOs, among soon-to-be STOs. Competition all over the place. And of course, as I said, there's good players and there are bad players. And there's plenty of bad players. And there's plenty of good players. But they all exist in this space. Now, I got to do this quick because I want to do questions. But I want to go through the fascist system. So in order to understand what we're talking about, you have to understand a very quick, non-exhaustive historical explanation of fascism. Because when we talk about the issue of free markets and when we talk about government controls, you have to understand what fascism is and how it plays into today's society. So those in power do not want a free market system anywhere. You have to understand that, first of all, about our country. There is not a desire to see a free market system in place. And when we talk about capitalists, I cringe at the idea that people use the term capitalist when they talk about Google or they talk about Jeff Bezos. Those are not capitalists. Those are cronyists. Those are people who have been able to build massive entities and industries and then block entry for others who are trying to come into the same space. They're not capitalists. Those in power want to maintain the current fascist system. What is fascism? Real quick, let's do it. So, what is fascism? To understand what fascism is, you have to understand what fascism is not. Number one, fascism is not Nazism. Though Nazis were fascists, fascism is not Nazism. It's not white supremacy. There are white supremacists who are fascists, but fascism is not white supremacy, and it's not the alt-right. Words mean something, and language means something. And to understand what fascism is, you have to go back to something George Orwell said, but you have to actually go back even before that to what Benito Mussolini himself referred to fascism. Basically, I got to go quick, so I'm just going to skip this. But George Orwell in 1946 basically said the word fascism is utterly meaningless. It is a synonym for being a bully. That's what it is in today's society. He said this in 1946. I would argue today it's the same thing. I got to go quick. So, what is fascism? Well, Benito Mussolini, the father of fascism, the man who actually gave the word fascism its name, said this. He said, fascism should rightly be called corporatism, as it is the merger of corporate and government power together. Now, that has been horribly misunderstood and miscommunicated and mistranslated in our society. Most people today think fascism, if you use this definition, think a corporation, i.e. Apple or Google or Facebook, working with the government equals fascism. That is incorrect. Now, that's a problem. That's what we might call cronyism. But if you use the actual definition that means something, it is not fascism. What is it? Well, this is actually the word, instead of corporatism, which is the word we translate into English, as what Mussolini was talking about, the word he would have used is this word, which is corporativismo. It is not the same word that we translate into a corporation, meaning an entity or a business. Instead, corporativismo means this. In the Fascist State, Mussolini wrote in 1932 in the Doctrine of Fascism, the Fascist State, the individual is not suppressed, but rather multiplied. Just as in a regiment, a soldier is not weakened, but multiplied by the number of his comrades. The Fascist State organizes the nation, but it leaves sufficient scope to individuals. It has limited useless or harmful liberties and has preserved those that are essential. It cannot be the individual who decides in this manner, but only the state. Mussolini simply believed that the merger of the collective, all of us, with the government created the fascist state. In short, as an individual, your freedom is not important. What's important is the collective. And anything that you do that infringes upon the collective's feelings should be taken from you. So in the fascist state, you're allowed to own property, but if it's not good for the collective, that you as an individual own property, then the collective takes it from you. Today we call that eminent domain. The fascist state, the idea behind it is that the collective is powerful, the individual is dangerous. So the individual cannot have freedom. That is the society that we live in today. So collectivism, corporativismo, the war on terror, drone strikes, drug war, militarization of police, government, private surveillance, policing for profit, vaccine freedom, food freedom, asset forfeiture, the Patriot Act, cryptocurrency. All these are issues that are fighting on the forefront of the issue of corporativismo, collectivism, the fascist state. Cryptocurrency is a huge part of that because the establishment will tell you every day how dangerous it is for you as individuals to possess something that is unregulated or not controlled by government, and that it's risky and that it's dangerous. And as Linda talked about the need that Google has to filter her Gmail in order to prevent her from getting emails that have to do with cryptocurrency, Google's not being mean. They're protecting her. They're protecting all of us, right, from these dangerous entities. That's why they can't advertise on Facebook. That's why they can't place an ad saying the Texas Bitcoin Conference will be in Austin this weekend because Facebook says it's dangerous. We've got to protect you. Now, none of us believe them, right? That's the group that's here. That's the mindset of people who are here. You know better than that. But there is an entire society of people who have been convinced that they're being protected. Take it even a step further than that. There is today a massive internet purge that is underway that is censoring and removing all independent media, if possible, from Google, from YouTube, from Apple, from Facebook, and from Twitter. Austin resident Alex Jones was among those who was purged. When Alex Jones was purged, I was one of the first people to say this is a terrible thing. Not because I agree with Alex Jones on everything or even many things, or even most things. But at the moment that you begin to say, this person speaking is a danger to the rest of us, therefore we must purge them, we have now essentially tied a noose around all of our necks. Because you're saying that some corporate entity, which by the way is never interested in protecting you, some government entity, which is never interested in actually protecting you, has been given the authority to silence anyone with whom it disagrees, and it's doing so in the name of protection. But they're not protecting you. So as independent media, how do we stay alive? How do we stay afloat? Well, one of the ways that you have to fight back is through funding. And for most independent media, it has become almost impossible. So many independent media are dying off right now because the purge that's happening, but also because of the inability to fund their operations. So one of the steps that's been taken that a lot of people may not be aware of is that Google has basically crushed advertising for anybody who's independent media. Facebook throttles traffic so that no one can even see you. So if you are still alive on Facebook, you didn't get purged, you didn't get wiped out, if you're still there, it's as if you're not, because you can create content, you can share it with people who have told Facebook explicitly, I like this page, I am a fan of this work, I want to see this content. They can't see you because Facebook throttles it. If you have your own website, Facebook will remove you for sending people from Facebook to your own website. But if you have your own website, the only way to make money is to place ads, and Google has said, well, we're not going to give you anything for those ads because we don't like who you are. So we'll place ads, we'll use up the space on your site for ads, and we'll give you something like 2 to 4 cents CPM. That's 2 to 4 pennies per 1,000 people who look at your site. There's no way you can survive. So how do you survive? Well, we have been able to survive thanks to, and I'll skip ahead and skip ahead. We have survived thanks to cryptocurrency, and specifically because of our sponsorships that have come from cryptocurrencies like Smart Cash. So in our case, Smart Cash is our sponsor. Smart Cash has a section within their treasury system that allows us to be able to survive as independent media. They fund what we do. They allow us to create 8 reality check segments every single month, which we release every single Tuesday and every single Thursday. And that's possible because of a treasury system that they have set up that allows them to be able to fund, again, our content. A lot of other media have tried to go this route. They've tried to go the route of getting funded in this way. Some have been successful in it. Some have not been successful in it. But it is critically important. So I've got to tell you, real quick before we do questions, a little bit about why Smart Cash has been so important for us. Freedom, first of all, is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. And what Smart Cash has done is it has allowed us to not only present information, by the way, that is not cryptocurrency related. We're talking about foreign policy, we talk about war, we talk about taxes, we talk about Saudi Arabia, whatever it is, whatever's going on in the news cycle that talks about individual freedom, we're covering that. But because of the support of a cryptocurrency, we're able to talk about those issues. And I'm going to tell you that as an independent journalist, it is scary to me how many folks like Anti-Media and the Free Thought Project, who are being run off of social media, who are being disappeared, do not have a funding structure to be able to survive. So Smart Cash for us works because they are an entity that makes sense. They have low fees. They're great for business. They use something called Instant Pay, which allows transactions to happen faster than they would through Visa or MasterCard. They also have what's called a decentralized community. So we didn't get approved because we're friends with one person who controls Smart Cash. We were voted on within their community, and we had enough votes to be able to pass. We actually did a similar thing with Dash prior to Smart Cash, and we were voted in the same way. They also have a treasury system. And the other thing I love about Smart Cash is they have something called Smart Hive Innovation. And their Smart Hive is where their community works every day to make their cryptocurrency better. Now, understand that without these guys, we would not exist as independent media. We would go away. We'd have to go do something else. It would not be possible. And so I'm grateful to them for what they have created in that system. But I also recognize that going forward, for us and for other media, unless there is a unity between the crypto world, the decentralized funding world, and independent media, if that does not happen in some form or some fashion on a massive scale, independent media will cease to exist. I absolutely believe that. People who say anybody can do it, just sit in front of your computer and talk. Guys, it's not how it works. You seen the commercial? That's not how any of this works. It's not. And so what I would encourage you guys in today, regardless of what you're involved in, regardless of what kind of cryptocurrency you're involved in, begin to consider how you can encourage crypto communities to embrace independent media, to connect with them, and to find ways to keep their voice alive. Because their voice is the only voice in media that's also standing up for your right to exist within this space. I want to take time for questions, so we'll do that now. Thank you.
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank you for coming here to the Texas Bitcoin Conference and for your lone voice of reason during the 2011 election. I think that was really important. It really highlighted the fact that all the other media was colluding. And I've seen some other clips like that recently on YouTube where somebody took a bunch of clips of different media outlets basically parroting the same thing over and over and over. And it was just really enlightening.
Thank you.
But with all this deplatforming that's going on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, I've been kind of following the arguments online a little bit and seeing that some folks are making the argument that this is the free market at work, that Google and Facebook and Twitter, they're free market entities, they're allowed to do this, right?
Right.
My personal opinion is that this is a result of regulatory capture by these organizations. And being able to corner the market. I mean, you see how Google is involved with the elections.
Yep.
Facebook is getting involved with the elections and things like that. What are your thoughts on whether or not this is a free speech issue related to the state or a free market issue?
So great question, thank you, and appreciate your kind words. So let's start here. I'm in my worldview and my political view. And I believe in free markets, and I also believe in private property. So yes, I believe that it is correct to say Google and Facebook are private companies, which they're not really truly private companies because they are on the stock market and they have shareholders, right? But they're private entities to someone, or many someones, and they have the right to prevent certain people from existing on those platforms. I think that's fair. Here's the problem with it. Number one, it's not free market that's purging their voices, right? Because if you said it's just a free market issue, it has been proven that in 2016 that the majority of content shared on Facebook was political, not coming from Russia. That's not true. There's about $100,000 in Facebook ads that's been confirmed to have been bought by Russian bot farms. $100,000, which on Facebook is like a drop in the ocean. But the majority of it is people who got into circles, social circles, and were communicating with each other, sharing content, sharing information with each other. So that's important to understand. Free market, do they have the right to purge anyone they want? I think they do have the right to purge. I think that Facebook has the right to say, we do not want anyone on our platform who thinks differently than we do. That's okay. What that does is it creates an opportunity. So 6 months ago, if I had come here and I had talked to you and said, I believe that Facebook and Google and Apple are antiquated in their worldview and how they're controlling systems, and we need to create something new, you'd say, that's stupid, right? Because we don't need to create something new when these things already exist and are heavily used. But the moment that you start to take tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of users, and say your opinions, views, and thoughts don't matter, you've now opened up the marketplace to say, well, where is the competitor? Who can actually compete with this system? And so let me just throw out a little mention here. So we are actually creating an alternative to YouTube, to Facebook, to Google. We have an answer to it. And I'll actually share that with you today also. And it's called Isagoria, or the ICE Media Network. And what we're actually doing is creating the first ever blockchain-based media company that will be set up as an over-the-top streaming player where we can actually stream 24/7 content through an over-the-top player, meaning PlayStation, Apple TVs, Roku, etc. We'll have mobile apps for this, and we'll also have over-the-top website design where people can go. But we have three functions with it. One is going to be that we're going to create the actual over-the-top 24/7 streaming channel. Secondly, we're going to create a channel system where anybody who's been purged from other sites will have the ability to come and have their own channels to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And then thirdly, we're going to build into it, through cryptocurrency, a tokenized system that has a treasury. So I mentioned to you, Smart Cash funds us through a treasury. Dash had originally funded us through a treasury system. Well, the problem with those treasury systems is that they are not designed specifically for media. There's way more media than there are spaces for them within those treasury systems. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to build a treasury system specific to independent media where our community will vote on projects to be funded and to be created. And then we'll move them through those. So on one hand, there is the negative of this happening, but the positive of it is if Facebook doesn't want 10 million or 100 million users because they don't like what you believe, we'll take you. We're happy to create an alternative that says, give those people a place to go, give them a place to speak, give them a place where they can find content, not an echo chamber, but allow people of many different dissenting voices, worldviews, and viewpoints to actually go and have conversation. I think the world becomes a better place when people get out of those echo chambers. Yes, sir.
So naturally, as a libertarian, you probably thought a lot about different governance systems. Mm-hmm. I would surmise that you're probably not a fan of the current one, the current structures that exist around us now, but are a fan of some of the, say, competitive systems that exist in cryptocurrencies and things like that, which at the end of the day are still governance systems to manage things. What changes would you make to some of our existing structures to bring them more towards what you would want to see?
So it's a very good question. I would like, first of all, I believe heavily in decentralization. So that can be a positive and it can be a negative. So a negative of decentralization is that when I originally went independent the second time, we were funded through the Dash Treasury. And so a decentralized community voted and decided to fund us. And we ran for 4 months. And then that same decentralized community decided that they wanted to fund other things instead because the crypto market was going down, and so they cut us off, right? So there's positives and there's negatives. But I still respect the fact that the community had a say. With Smart Cash, it's been that way as well. We have a decentralized community that has voted on it and voted for, the fact that they want it. And so we exist there right now. But that may not last either, right? So I believe decentralization is a big part of it. I would love to see more crypto move that way. When we talk about governance systems, I am a strong believer that the wider that community is, the better. One thing that Smart Cash does that I also like is that they have a system in which everyone is able to vote if you're a Smart Cash holder, as opposed to in the Dash community, for instance, you have to be a master node to vote. In Smart Cash, it's not that way. Everyone gets to vote if you just hold Smart Cash at all. So anyways, I think more decentralization is good. But as far as having specific steps that those communities can take, I don't have a whole lot for you. Probably should, but I don't. Yes, sir.
So I came in pretty late to this. I apologize.
Yeah, that's right.
One thing can you touch up on is your platform. How many users do you have? What features? How have your customers reacted, and how have you scaled so far with your application? Great
questions. The answer on customers is 0, because we
literally... So this is development?
Right. We just launched it a week ago, the idea a week ago. So what we've done is we're actually in the process of writing the white paper right now for it to explain to people exactly how it would work. But we have several companies we're working with on a token economy and how it would work. Okay. So we're structuring everything right now, but we're in the very, very early stages.
Very cool. So what features do you currently have working with the platform, and where do we see the timeline and when you'll be able to release?
So if you go to isagoria.com, that's where we're building everything out. We have a Telegram there. If you want to get connected with us on Telegram, you can. And it shows just kind of the layout of how it would work. So it explains the treasury system there in some detail. It explains the timeline in some detail. But I mean, like I said, it's brand new. So we're just getting started. Our hope is that we launch this sometime in 2019.
Like last week or so came up, or you've been working on?
We've been working on the idea of it, but I guess it was 2 weeks ago, because it was actually in New Hampshire. And I was speaking on something else and decided to go ahead and announce it.
Very cool.
Yeah,
well,
so
congratulations.
Thank you. This is like super brand new. Yes.
Awesome.
If this is an infant, the doctor just smacked that baby. I mean, we're just getting started.
I appreciate your honesty, and I'll look into it.
Thank you. Please do.
Hey, Ben, Kevin McKernan here. I gave a presentation yesterday about freedom of the press through journalism, but academic publishing. And I think it's worth highlighting that about half of all the academic press is controlled by 5 companies. So this is fantastic, but if we don't also fix the scientific journalism problems? Because much of that content just gets echoed through some of the media. So I'm curious whether this thing can do scientific publishing as well, because I think if we don't nail that, we're still going to get these types of fights over vaccines and climate change and cannabinoids and all that stuff.
So, fantastic question. Short answer is it will. The honest answer is because of what you just said. Not because, that's something we hadn't really thought or even discussed much of. I do know as a journalist for many years the echo chamber behind how that works in terms of what you're talking about with the medical community. I have huge resistance to the CDC and the way that news media just regurgitates anything that they put out at any time. And you're absolutely right in terms of vaccines, in terms of cannabis and CBD and all that. It's crazy to think that you have such a corrupt system that anything that's created over here or denied over here, right, in the medical community, is told to the media, it becomes a fact and is regurgitated to the public, and then the folks over here use the media to say an example of how it validates this system, right? And then the media validates this system. So it's like this circle of these corruption and lies going around. So absolutely, Kevin. I think that it needs to be a major part of this. We've done a lot of work in the past with it. I know the work that you're doing, and it's fantastic, and I think it's really good stuff. But yes, I will say yes, absolutely. It should be, will be.
Okay, I have a question for you, and it and actually an assertion about a conclusion. There is this thing about fake news, and the more I listen to fake news and assertions and accusations of fake news, the more I wonder if they're really saying, do you have a bias, do you have an agenda, or are you literally lying, or are you just wrong? And so, for example, maybe right even now, I come from a vastly science-based education and everything else, and I will say vaccines are incredibly good and all that sort of thing. But how do we deal with the fact that no one's ever going to agree, and what the heck use is claiming somebody is fake news? Right,
okay, so a couple good points. And let me just say too, I also believe that vaccines are good, but I do not believe that all vaccines are good for all people in all quantities at all times, right? And then the reason that's an important distinction is because our media has helped to create a system where it's either or, right? Either you are a denier of science or you go along with whatever we tell you. And so one thing that has to happen in the marketplace of ideas is legitimate discussion, legitimate debate. Not to convince people, because people never win debates by convincing anyone of any truth, but by enlightening people to information they had not previously known. And that's something we're severely lacking in our modern society. We do not attempt to inform people anymore. We attempt to control people with information. So that's first. The second thing is fake news. Do you guys know actually where the term, who used it first, who the first famous person to use the term fake news was? That's right. President Barack Obama was the first person to use it, and he used it 2 years before Donald Trump ever did. And the term was actually used as a way, it began to enter the vernacular as a way of combating against independent media who said things that dissented from the establishment. That's important, because it shows you that 2 years before Trump came along, 2 years before the Russians hacked our democracy, 2 years before any of that garbage, right? There was already a plan, and even years before that, in place to say there is disruption being caused by independent journalists, and they're using these social sites, so we need to get rid of them. So Obama starts using the term fake news to describe information that's unreliable. Remember at the same time, 2 years, back in 2013, 2014, remember Dianne Feinstein saying that there needed to be specific criteria given to journalists, because not everyone can just be a journalist. That you had to work for some kind of major corporate entity with a certain number of employees to count as a journalist. This was a whole thing that was happening in 2014. By the time Trump came along, what he did, whether you like Donald Trump or not, you cannot deny this fact. Nobody in our current system is able to take a word or a nickname and use it with the kind of ferocity that he is able to do. And so what he did was he took the term fake news, which was not his, and he used it to describe CNN. And people were like, yes, that's great. And it caught on because it hadn't worked before, and it actually worked for him. So how do you distinguish what is fake and what is real? Well, sourcing is a big part of it. Good information is hard to find, and that's one thing we want to create with our system as well. And we will have a tiered system to an extent. But it's not about controlling that content and giving our community voting power, and our community will actually have voting power in our system to be able to select information and move information to the top will be key. Yes, I have like 3 minutes, so give me a warning. Go ahead.
No, I've got to get back.
They messed you up by texting
Well,
you.
I figure since you're, libertarian, you read Lou Rockwell, and on like October 18th, they said like the entity that is making censorship decisions for Facebook, as publicly announced, is the Atlantic Council, a partly U.S. government-funded entity. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've heard some about that. I know that in 2016 that Media Matters for America also announced that it had been given access to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube's algorithms to be able to find propaganda and what they called conspiracy theorists so that they could flush them out. I think there are multiple groups that are doing that. I don't think it's just one. But I think it all has the same mindset. It all has the same end goal, which is to protect establishment media because establishment media protects establishment political systems and establishment corporations. Last question. We'll do it. Do we have time? Can we do it real quick?
Really fast.
I'll be fast. Go ahead.
Not really a question or comment.
Okay, go for it.
I do independent media.
Okay.
When Facebook and all these media started blocking everything, I looked at that and I said, that's probably the best thing that can happen. Mm-hmm. I'm an old guy. I was born dead center baby boom. And I look at all this stuff and I say, I've seen all this trash before.
Yeah.
I don't listen to this crap anymore.
Yeah.
And my generation, we're the right generation. We are sick to death of the nonsense and we're looking for real information. Mm-hmm. I think what they have been doing is they opened the door for us.
Yeah.
YouTube.
Right on.
They signed their own death warrant.
Yeah.
They had control. They gave it away. We will take it from them. You're in the right place, the right time.
I appreciate it. They're about to become MySpace, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works. Guys, thank you again. I want to encourage you, check out the site, isagoria.com, and if you do go there, join up on the Telegram group. Thank you, guys.